Everybody. It's David Jerome with the El Paso Chamber of Commerce, and today we are going to continue our series on exploring with business leaders what's happening in El Paso as we try to reimagine, let's say, the next normal following this COVID-19 crisis. Today, I'm very pleased because I have not only one of the sharpest business minds in town, but also a close personal friend, Bryan Crowe. He's on our board at the Chamber. He is the CEO of Destination El Paso and a proud graduate of Michigan State University. And so we're very lucky to have him here today. And Bryan, maybe if I could, you can fill in any gaps, of course, on your resume that you want to, that I may have left out that you'd like to just touch upon. But I think one of the things I would be interested, though, and maybe as we sort of open up, is I do think I still find that people have a hard time coming to grips with just exactly how, let's say, big this crisis is. And I don't want to excite people in the wrong way and get them nervous, but I think unnecessarily, as it were. But I also think it's important that we have a good fact base for how we look at where we are so that we can make smart decisions on how to reemerge. And maybe I could get you to comment on that for a moment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, David, thank you and the Chamber for having me here this afternoon. This is the new format that we get to engage with people on through these video chats. I'm actually here downtown in our office and normally working from home, but I had to come in to check something in the building. So I was down here, so I thought I'd go ahead and broadcast from here. I think a lot of us have become experts in how to use all the different video conferencing tools. This is pretty much the view that we have for most people. Like you said, I agree, that it's not a question of wanting to create uncertainty or panic for folks. But I do think it is important that we do have fact-based information and we do have understand the reality of what it is we're dealing with and what the timetable looks like, what some of the unknowns that still remain are, and there are still a lot of unknowns. I think we've got a lot of great, intelligent people nationally, internationally, locally that are working on these issues and have a lot of great insight into what things might look like, but there are still a lot of unknowns. And I think it's important for people to recognize that. And it's something that I think that we also have to understand that it takes time to do. You can't just flip a switch and suddenly have an understanding and a comfort level, I think, of kind of where we are and where we're going and how that's going to be different. And it affects all of us in different ways. And there's a level of patience and understanding, I think, as a community we have to have with each other as well. But, looking at, the hospitality and the event industry, which are really two primary areas of what Destination El Paso does, between promoting travel to El Paso and then promoting events and activities in the facilities that we manage. We've seen, and not unlike other companies, specifically those in the hospitality segment, we've been drastically impacted by a almost complete drop in travel and the end essentially of public gatherings and events as we know it. So our two primary funding streams for our operation are the taxes on room night stays in hotels. And right now, hotel occupancy, we're looking at overall, going from about the low 70s in occupancy, dropping down to between 25 and 30% in occupancy, which that is a significant fall off. But I will say El Paso is a little bit more fortunate than some other communities. Our occupancy levels are actually higher than a lot of other cities in the U.S. and in Texas. And a lot of that due to military, federal, and other required travel to the region, but still having a major impact on our hospitality community and for us on the related tax revenues that are connected to that. And then with the loss of the events and the facilities, without concerts and festivals and and meetings and conventions in our facilities, that has dried up that revenue stream for us as well, which has forced us to to shrink our organization size and unfortunately furlough almost about 75% of our staff here as we are sort of riding out the storm and looking towards where we go forward.
Well, Bryan, one of the things I'm fond of saying about this current crisis is it's sort of a threefold tragedy. I mean, obviously, at first you have the sort of human health issue, which you and your partner know how horrible that is, I mean, directly. But I mean, it's also led, obviously, to an economic crisis of I think, unprecedented levels for the U.S. economy anyway. And then the other thing that it has done, I think, also is it's created an information crisis. And getting good information is quite tough to get. And that's why we're doing this session in part, is to make sure we have business leaders who know what's going on, able to share this with the rest of the community. And I know, I think we all do with I think it's like 70% of the US economy is driven by consumer behavior, and it's just gone off a cliff suddenly with stay-at-home orders and things like that. So travel and tourism has been, I think, dented extremely hard. And I was just wondering, out of a sense, how many hotel rooms do we have in El Paso? And what do you think the sort of occupancy levels are now? And do you have any idea, even if it's a rough forecast, because I know that you work a lot with the hotel association as well, what do they think, or what do you think it might be where we could start to see the beginning of, or the end of the beginning, let's say, maybe?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, El Paso has about almost 10,000 sleeping rooms throughout the El Paso area, about 9,000 in change. And those are varying from all different types of accommodation, from interstate properties to full service properties, limited service properties, as well as motels and B&Bs and other smaller accommodating facilities. Generally, I mean, typically around this time of year, our occupancy is somewhere in the 72 to 74% range. Which is very strong. Generally, any occupancy above 62, 65% is considered to be strong occupancy for a particular area. We've seen that fall off right now. It's usually right around between about 28 and 30% occupancy is what we're seeing in our reporting. I will say our reporting lags by about a week. And looking at not the full week of last week, but the week prior, we did start to see an uptick around the dates of where Texas reopened on that Saturday, Sunday. We saw occupancy levels going up. We aren't sure if that's related yet because there's only 2 days of a 7-day run report. We're really looking forward to seeing our next report, which will come out here on Wednesday, to see how the following full week was shaping up. But we saw occupancy go from about 28% to almost 38%. Overall on an average, and for the weekend we were getting into the 40s. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I do think that some of the things that are affecting that, obviously interstate travel, our proximity to New Mexico, which is still a little bit more restricted than Texas is right now, and so there may be folks that are traveling from the surrounding areas into the El Paso area for access to retail or other services that they may not be able to get access to in their home community. And I think we'll continue to see that develop over time as things start to open up. I think one of the things that's a big unknown for us, and it's a huge impact and contributor to our economy here, not just from the hospitality segment, but from our community as a whole, is the impact from northern Mexico, from Juarez, from the state of Chihuahua, surrounding regions. We traditionally promote heavily into Chihuahua City and Torreon for folks to take that 4-hour trip into El Paso, stay in a hotel, shop, have entertainment experiences, dining experiences, see family and friends. And as I think most of us know, B1, B2, non-essential traffic is not allowed across the ports of entry here between the United States and Mexico. So folks that are on general tourism visas who do not have essential travel are currently unable to cross. And so that is a big that is going to be an impediment to our recovery here. When we look at how we think our market will recover and what time it will take to do that, one of the big components of that recovery strategy is northern Mexico. And unfortunately, I think with the way the COVID is impacting Mexico and Juarez alike, is going to create a concern for, I think, federal officials, and you won't see them reopen the border to anything but essential traffic for quite some time. So that unknown makes it so a little bit more challenging for us in terms of planning purposes. Aside from that, we have a strategy where we're looking at, as people are comfortable and we're allowed to be out right now. As you know, the city just extended its emergency order through June 10th. This week, our local officials are still encouraging folks to stay home and avoid contact with other groups of people. Once that starts to change, once that starts to open up and we're able to safely be moving around a little bit more, maybe still in smaller groups, getting out in the community. One of our strategies is to actually look locally. Normally, we don't message. Our organization doesn't usually do a lot of messaging here locally, but we think it's going to be important that El Pasoans are comfortable in their own community and that they know what is open and what things there are to do in the community, because I think we're frontline ambassadors to folks that will come to visit us or that would travel into El Paso. We think that as we start to get things back open again, that 2020 will be the year of the road trip. I think people are going to be more likely to be with family and friends in small groups, load in a car, and travel further than they may have before. Maybe where now if a 3-hour trip was kind of the distance that we would want to go before, now the idea of driving considerably further than that, 6, 9, 12 hours, being able to control our surroundings, not be on an airplane, having to go through an airport, which aside from maybe some either real or perceived health concerns from air travel, there's also cost issues right now, scheduling, and the breakup of frequency as flights is such that it almost takes as long to fly as it does to drive when you factor in some of the new routing and the flight cancellations and flight schedules. So we do think the road trip's going to return to being king, and so we're building itineraries to where El Paso and the surrounding area are going to be great places for people to come and explore. El Paso has a lot of what we call product or things to do, if you will, that are going to be COVID friendly. Things, are great outdoors. Once our parks in the area open, that's both the state parks and local parks, both of which remain closed at this time. But once those things start to open, I'm encouraging people to get out to explore things like Huenco Tanks and Franklin Mountain State Park, even southern New Mexico, obviously all in accordance with when health officials think that those things can occur. We think we've got some great assets there. And then it is going to be a long road to recovery. We do think that the fact that the federal government is such a big player in our economy here, from Fort Bliss to federal departments and federal contractors, that there is a lot of essential travel to the market. And I think we're fortunate in that we have such a good diversity of what drives travel to El Paso. I think we will see some recovery a little bit quicker than some other communities in the U.S. our size will. We're not entirely dependent upon, for example, convention, meeting, business travel. We're not entirely dependent on strictly leisure travel. We have a nice between Mexican travel to interstate travel to leisure travel to essential business travel. We have a pretty good diversity of that. So I do think our recovery period will be a little bit shorter, but I think we're a ways off from, I guess almost what we started talking about is I think we have to start becoming comfortable with the idea that we're not going to go back to before. I don't think there's no trip back. How we work, how we function, how our stores work, and restaurant experiences and events and activities, I think will be changed for a long time, if not forever changed, by this international event.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, I warned everybody that you were sharp. You just proved it. So thank you for not making a liar out of me. But interestingly, Bryan, just a couple of quick little things that I just wanted to get your reaction to very quickly. How big is the basin now? If road trips are the new normal, how many hours or how many miles is the reasonable El Paso market now in your mind?
Well, so traditionally, when we break up the different ways that we message and market, we have something for our drive markets that we call Travel 300, which is basically a 300-mile radius on the U.S. side, because we have a different approach to Mexican travel. But on the U.S. side, about a 300-mile radius surrounding El Paso to encourage people, as El Paso is sort of the big city, is the oasis. We have experiences and entertainment and retail options, and the airport and other things that a lot of the surrounding community does not have. We think coming off of the pandemic that is easily a Travel 600 region, and I do think that there are people that would be willing to travel, even further than that. People whose summer vacation have been, trips to resort destinations by flying there and spending time in a particular environment, may now be looking at road tripping and take, for example, doing a southern pass of national parks or other natural experiences that can be had. And El Paso is a part of a number of different trails and connections between other markets that contain, outdoor assets. So we have always promoted a lot of these. We're just going to move some of these items really more front and center to what we're talking about when we're promoting travel to El Paso. We will have an expanded reach into the markets that we will have paid advertising into, and we'll look at how those are responding. We'll also track data as to who is traveling through El Paso and for what purpose. If we can identify some other markets that make sense for us, we'll look at those too. But I think it's entirely reasonable to expect that any of the other major destination markets in Texas would drive this far west, where in the past they would not. They'd be looking at flying, or they would be driving east. So this is an opportunity to have an experience they've not had before.
It's interesting because I think that, and this ties into the next quick thing I wanted to ask you, but it's interesting because I think a lot of folks in El Paso business-wise have an eye to Austin, Dallas, and Houston for obvious reasons. Big cities, global leaders, lots of business opportunities there. But I think that, as you've alluded to before, you can have a very international experience in El Paso, given that we are literally on the doorstep of the 15th largest economy on the planet, that being Mexico, right? And I have an ongoing sort of informal poll that I keep running, is that what do you think the percentage of business is that El Paso does with Northern, because the economic tourism from Mexico into El Paso is huge. And until that opens up again, we are going to be handicapped, let's say, and that's going to be difficult. Yeah. But what do you think the percentage is? 20, 30, 35, 40, 45?
I would say it's in that 35, 40 range would have been my guess.
That's what most people say. That's what most people say, in that range. That's huge.
Yeah, and what I find Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
You're good. You're good.
No, I was just going to say that I just find it interesting because if you get that wrong, you're missing 30%, 40% of the market. And that's everybody I speak to has the same number.
Yeah, if early on when we were, 5-10 years ago in economic development efforts to bring some bigger retail or other types of activities here, that was always the trick, was quantifying the Mexico impact, and then not just from a general leisure travel tourism impact, but also you mentioned from the business impact, how many jobs in El Paso are tied to things in Mexico and vice versa. I mean, the communities are very much interconnected. Fortunately, the essential travel, so some of the commercial commerce and all that are still being allowed to move. Goods in that are moving, probably not as easily as maybe as some folks would like, but I think unfortunately it's one of these other elements that we don't control, and that's been true for El Paso for a long time. Whether it was perceived concerns about safety and Juarez having an impact on El Paso, and other elements that we don't control. How do we pivot around that? How do we work through that? So for us, we are prepared with a strategy to once again welcome Mexican nationals and the folks that live in northern Mexico back to El Paso. We currently have some messaging that we're doing through digital and social outreach to basically, to tell them that we're thinking about them, and although they need to be focused at home and on their own family at this time, but when the time is right, we'll be here to welcome them back to the community, because there's such a big impact on our economy as a whole. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of being able to manage the spread of COVID-19 in Mexico, and to the point that the federal officials are comfortable allowing, returning to, allowing both essential and non-essential travel.
Yeah, it's really interesting, but clearly, when we think about immigration and issues with Mexico and free movement back and forth, that is good for business. And I don't mean that. I know there's a political context around this, but from a business perspective, the sooner that opens, the better, I think. And it sounds like you do too. So
yeah, look, it's one of these things that has to be handled, correctly, right? We certainly don't want to create a greater public health concern for our community or for Juarez, and you don't want to make a situation worse. But I do think that it's one of the elements that is going to be core to our recovery from an economic standpoint, as you know, as a
Hmm.
whole, not just on the travel tourism segment, but as a whole, is reopening it up. I mean, I speak from, you know, personally. I mean, I have friends that live on the other side of the border that we used to, you know, we used to get together for dinner or hanging out on one side or the other, and right now they can't cross, you know. So like
Hmm.
even from like a personal and family, and that's just, and there are a lot of people who have families, their whole families are spread across both sides of the border. And so I'm sure that it's, for aside from the economic side, there's the you know the this so the our own feeling of our own friends and family and being cut off from them. You know, as this pandemic hasn't provided enough, you know, societal pressure to us in terms of being able to survive, but then to be disconnected from people. So I think it's important, both financially and from a business perspective, but also I think from a, you know, a quality of life perspective, being able to be reconnected to what really is the other half of our city.
Yeah, it's true. And I even have, as I know you do, we have employees over there, you know, who are just trying to get to work.
Yeah.
And even that could be, are they essential or not? Those kinds of things.
Well, fortunately, as
Let
I
me
understand it,
switch.
I mean, folks that are, you know, U.S. citizens that are able to move back and forth. I believe the restriction is on the B1 and B2 visas. The tourism visa,
Yeah,
as my understanding, is where it's restricted.
right. Yeah, that's right. Very quickly, I'm going to switch gears for a moment. We'll come back to El Paso because we've already got at least a few questions in here. But before we do, your home company, ASM, a very large events company across the country. I was just wondering if we could go to a little more global competitive kind of conversation and just move away from El Paso for a moment, and we'll come back, as I said. But how is ASM dealing with this across the United States? And maybe we can bring it back to El Paso by asking if there's any lessons that El Paso businesses could learn from based on what you guys are doing to remain operational, let's say, during this crisis on a national level.
Sure. So ASM Global is both a national and international company, we operate facilities and venues all over the world. And of course, as you know, I mean, this pandemic has left no country spared, and so it's a, you know, it's obviously a massive impact. I mean, because we exist to bring groups of people together to have great experiences, and a lot of it's done in usually in close proximity, things like convention centers, arenas, and theaters, stadiums, et cetera. And so this is a direct threat to that as it stands right now. You know, a number of our venues and buildings have tenants, things like, you know, the NBA or the NFL or other large sport leagues that are tenants, and so that we're waiting for those leagues to make decisions of what they're going to do in terms of whether they're going to play to empty stadiums, reduce schedules, adjusting
Mhm.
for that. I know one of the things that's also a challenge is that, I mean, if you've seen, there's not a uniform approach throughout the United States in terms of what is going to be allowed to occur, what's going to be open and what's allowed. Different states have taken
Right.
different approaches. And, you know, when you're talking about, you know, everything from, you know, nationalized sports leagues to, concert tours or Broadway performing art tours, I mean, we crisscross jurisdictions, states, counties, as these tours move, and it's very difficult to plan a tour, plan a routing if in this city we are allowed to play, but the next city that we would normally play in that's 3-4 hours away in a different jurisdiction we're not allowed to, or what we're going to be allowed to do is different. So I think that makes it very difficult for us to be able to put together what you see as our traditional touring. So it's really caused a lot of our facilities to be to really be in this on hold configuration. Many of our facilities also are being used by our community for other purposes, everything from supplying and supporting food distribution, food banks, to facilities that were turned into field hospitals in a number of different communities. And so we stand ready to be able to serve the communities that we work in. And I think, like many of our businesses, we are looking at collectively, we're using our resources of talented folks that work for us all over the world to look at what will the return look like, what types of practices and procedures, standard operating procedures and things we have to undertake. Certainly things related to the sanitation and management of both employees and our guests is going to be key. Our company is putting together a proprietary program that we call the Venue Protect program, which is basically is putting together guidelines and practices for how we're going to keep our employees and our guests safe. what we're doing in terms of cleaning procedures, capacities, whether it's, using thermal cameras or touchless thermometers to screen employees, to screen guests. But all those things, we have to tailor them based on each individual jurisdiction that we work in. Because then, as I mentioned, states, cities, and counties each have different approaches. So we are working aggressively to do that, and so that we have those resources available to us when it comes time for us to open. But we're also very much understand our role in our community, and we want to make sure that we're there to support the initiatives of that community versus not. So each of these markets is kind of taking a different approach depending on what that community wants to see happen in their city.
Well, I think that's an excellent thing, and if I can presume, I think it's an excellent lesson for here too. You and I have chatted about most of these subjects over time, but one thing that I would say is that we're aware that there are, with a crisis of this sort, the complete shutdown of the U.S. economy practically, you're running into operational shock issues. I can't get things that I need to run the business, let's say, people, whatever, supply chains aren't functioning, whatever the case is. That's the normal operational shock to the system that one could expect from a crisis like this. But I think that there's also been a bit of a design shock, and you trigger this with me when you mention the steps you're taking to make your customers feel secure and safe, and your employees for that matter. But I've noticed, when you go to different venues, even though they're open, they can still be empty. And I think there's still a lag, let's say, between confidence in the consumer that things are safe and okay for them to get involved in, and the opening that we're having. I think part of that is because information is bad, and people are having a hard time figuring out what to trust in terms of data. But I think that makes it more incumbent on us to do the kinds of things that you guys describe, with setting up separate hygiene programs, proprietary or whatever. I think these are extremely important steps to undertake right now, and I'm very pleased to see it. And I think to the extent that we could emulate or bring something like that to El Paso would be very good for our hotels, restaurants, and other things that are facing the same, let's say, demand shock that everywhere else is.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, David, which is that issue, right? That even if we are open, will people come, whether that's to a concert or to a restaurant or to a hotel or to a community as a whole? One of the things that we're doing in concert with the local Hotel and Lodging Association, and there's been some great leadership from the American Hotel Lodging Association at the national level, is we want to make sure that we can put together a set of standards and practices to ensure that all of our hotels, whether those from the big name brands and flags that have a great reputation and resources behind them, to independent properties that may need more support to be able to make sure that they have all the things in place to be able to reopen, that we can identify that there is a minimum practice that's taking place. And then when we're messaging and marketing, we're leading with that. We're telling people, here's our community, here's what's open, and here's what we're doing to keep you and our employees safe. That's going to be a really important element in communication, whether that's be for us operating our venues, or for a small business operating a restaurant, or cosmetology facility, or anything in between. The people you're going to have to assure your client base that you're taking practices to be able to do that. And I know that the chamber worked very closely with the city, Hispanic Chamber, and others to put together a great website with resources and information, so that our businesses do know what's going on, what's allowed, and where to get all these resources. And that's a big undertaking. It's a big task, and it's one that we're going to have to continue to do as we move forward.
I have an idea, Bryan. Should I share it with you now or later?
Let's do it.
It's probably crazy, so you can tell me if it is. But one of the things I think would be sort of fun to do is, what if we came up with a certification? If we went together with the city and the county and came up with a that these venues, and put it on the El Paso Stands Together website, these are the venues that have made a commitment to your hygiene and safety. Maybe that's already what you're doing.
No, that's exactly what we were talking about with the hotels, that we wanted to identify something so that they would be able to put, on their doors, to come in at their check-in desk, in their advertising, in anything
compliant with this.
And I think it makes sense to pull those things under one roof. There's no there's no pride in ownership of those things. I think that as a
No,
community,
it's just
if we're
help people, right?
yeah, if we're the community that's put something together and it's identifiable and there's a minimum set of practices that we're saying that we're upholding. And I think that we also you have to put a feedback process in there so that there's, if someone observes something they think is an issue, that there's an appropriate.
Well, that's why you put it on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
People can easily
Oh
log
yeah.
in and say what they, yeah.
People love
That's
to
the audit system.
provide feedback, so we'll like it
Yeah.
enough. But no, you're
That's for
absolutely
sure.
correct, David. I think that's another way that where we can all work together, because that's going to be important, not only to be able to make our local community comfortable, but coming out and enjoying the things that they used to enjoy when it's appropriate to do so, but also the surrounding areas and those that are going to come to visit us. It's the communities that are going to communicate well and be able to do that are going to be the ones that people are going to be more comfortable coming to first. And so I think there's a lot of things that are in El Paso's favor in terms of what we bring to offer, where we could be in a lead position for that.
Well, as usual, as you said at the beginning, you and I could talk about probably anything together,
Yeah,
because
no
we
problem.
do, and we're already at almost 30 minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you one question that I've
Sure.
gotten in, and then give you a chance to wrap it up before I do. But I'll just say this: one of the things that is a focus also is, what kind of stimulus packages could we look at, like infrastructure, different things like that would help get people back to work. And one of my favorite areas, and just so happens somebody asked about it, so I'm going to jump on this, is the arena. And I know it's political, but I think that we might normally see the debate around economic development and historic preservation and stuff in one light. I think given where we are today, I actually see something like the arena much more in the light of a stimulus package in terms of job creation and things like that. And if we were to embark on such a project in the near term, it could be ready when hotels and conventions and different things like that are beginning to come back in their own right as well, or have just recently come back. What is your and I don't mean to put you on the spot politically, so forgive me if I do. It's not the intention, but it's more of a where do you think that is from an economic stimulus side? Do you agree with that thinking? Where do you think the business community, let's say, of El Paso should be on this issue?
Well, there's no question that the intent for the development of the downtown multipurpose and cultural performing arts center, the arena, was always intended to be an economic engine and a way to continue to develop downtown and to drive more foot traffic to downtown, to encourage residential downtown, to encourage additional businesses, small and otherwise, to make downtown their home, and to really make this, really the living room, if you will, of our community, the downtown area. Certainly, a project like the arena is going to have significant impact under construction, in terms of the jobs related to construction and development of the facility. But then there's the operating of the facility and drawing people to the facility each year for events and activities that help the surrounding area, from whether it be from hotels and meetings to to the businesses that surround it. Even in the early master planning and reporting that was released in 2015, 2016, there was a considerable amount of work done from an economic reporting standpoint on what was being proposed as to how it would impact the community and how it could further additional development to include additional hotels at some point. We were even looking at expansion of the convention center at some point when that's appropriate. I do think that the current the current pandemic and the current financial pressures that are put on not only the city but on all of us, the businesses, and those of us that pay taxes here in the community, I think will certainly have an effect on the trajectory and the path for that. But I don't think it's a matter of taking that project off the board. I think it's important to still. I think it's going to be important to relook at those numbers and look at what economic impact it was intended from that, and can we still achieve that, and what do we do to make that happen. And I think from the bigger picture, I still think it is important for us as a community to think big and bring forth big projects that will continue to grow and develop our community and make us a desirable place to live and work and to bring business.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think as the 19th, 20th largest city, depending on whose numbers you use in the country, not having a ability to book world-class acts in an arena strikes me as a significant, sort of competitive disadvantage. So I, for one, very strong supporter of it. But I appreciate your comments, Bryan, on that. Listen, let me just wrap this up real quick. But first, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience before we go? Any thoughts?
Gosh, no, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I know that there's a lot of things that we still don't know, and I think that I want to say that I think that's important. That's okay. I know that sometimes I think folks feel some uncertainty. Sometimes, are stressed or are otherwise feeling the impact of this and the unknown, whether from family or home or from work. I think it's important for all of us to remember to communicate with each other, those of us that we know, our friends and people we love, and to take care of each other. And that's going to be a core component of our survival moving forward. I do think that this is a community that's built for that. Culture here is very much one of a big family, and just like you would expect a big family, we've got areas where there's a hot disagreement, but we're all very protective of each other as a whole. I think that's a great strength that we have as a community that'll help us, stay El Paso strong and to move ahead. I want to encourage people to check out our social media pages. So through Visit El Paso and through El Paso Live, our two social media channels, and to stay connected with us. And we're going to be here, and we're going to be bigger and better, and it's going to be a road ahead. But I think that we are up for the challenge, and it's one of the things I think where our community can really shine through.
Bryan, as always, a delight to be able to spend a few minutes with you chatting. Edifying and fun nonetheless. It's really great. You're a good friend to not only me but also to our community and the chamber. We're lucky to have you. Your leadership now is more important than ever. I think all communities right now are struggling to try to figure out what our next, let's say, normal is going to be like as we work to sort of define that for our businesses and our community. We're going to need business leaders like you to help us. And it's a real privilege to spend a few minutes with you. I'm sure the audience will like this as much as I did, and we'll let you know how it goes. And I really do thank you in terms of how this went, and we really do thank you for the time, Bryan. Thank you so much for being generous with us. Thanks.
Of course. Thanks, David, for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. All right.